Good morning, everyone. I just want to welcome you to this Article 2 session. As some of you know, Article 2 is one of the 15 articles in the UUA bylaws. What makes Article 2 significant is it describes the UUA or UU characteristics, and there are 4 sections that we'll be going through today. But they're the UUA purpose, the current version, our principles and sources, and the inclusion statements, and finally the beliefs. The UUA bylaws require reviewing this Article 2 every 15 years. So we're in the middle of that cycle right now. And the purpose of this session is to educate everyone on the current Article 2. You know, there are people who don't know what Article 2 is, so thanks for coming today. I think this will be a very useful session. We will be recording this, so if you have friends or people in the congregation that know you couldn't come to this session, it'll be available similar to our sermons and sessions in the church. So with that, I want to introduce you to Jay Kiskell. He will be our main presenter today. Also, Andrea Barra is our facilitator. I'll be a moderator, so I'll be monitoring the chats and things, and just making sure that whoever is participating online on YouTube can also ask questions or make any comments. So I will now turn this over to Jay.
Thank you very much. This is going to be a participatory event today, and I've asked several people to read, and when you do so, please come to the microphones up here. But I'd like to start with the chalice lighting. And this is among my favorite, and I also think very appropriate for today as well. We build on foundations we did not lay. We warm ourselves by fires we did not light. We sit in the shade of trees we did not plant. We drink from wells we did not dig. We profit from persons we did not know. This is as it should be. Together, we are more than any one person could be. Together, we can build across the generations. Together, we can renew our hope and faith in the life that is yet to unfold. Together, we can heed the call to ministry of care and justice. We are ever bound in community. May it be so. I'm going to read, actually with some help, our UUCA Covenant of Healthy Relations. Are these mics on too? Okay. The UUCA Covenant of Healthy Relations. We need not think alike to love alike. One of our Unitarian Universalist ancestors, Francis David, spoke those words more than 400 years ago to describe the foundation of our unity as a religious community. The purpose of this covenant is to increase awareness of actions that each of us can take to nurture and support our beloved community. To this end, we, the people of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Atlanta, affirm the following covenant of healthy relations.
We will be mindful of how we communicate with and about others. We intend to listen actively and seek to understand the perspectives and opinions of others. Use I statements when expressing our own views, always mindful that our thoughts and opinions may not be shared by others. Be respectful and kind in our words, tone, and body language. Use email and other forms of communication with respect, kindness, and special care. Communicate directly with the person or group involved instead of gossiping or speaking negatively about others in the wider community. Assume that others act with good intentions. Check the accuracy of our perceptions and assumptions. Be forgiving and loving when we or others make mistakes. Apologize when warranted and seek to make amends. Call on congregational resources when help is needed.
We will celebrate the diversity within our community. We intend to reach out to others with warmth and kindness in a spirit of welcome. Recognize and honor the diversity of beliefs and spiritual paths within our community, including words and ways people choose to express their spirituality. Be curious, appreciative, and informed about perspectives that differ from our own. Honor the contributions and needs of those who have been historically marginalized in the larger world and in our congregation, and seek growth in our ability to be welcoming.
Take that down. We will build the common good. We intend to build mutual trust through an honest and responsible use of information, contribute our gifts of time, talents, and financial resources, encourage and support the involvement of everyone in the life of our congregation, express gratitude and appreciation for the contributions of others, respect the roles and responsibilities of congregational leaders, respect UUCA's established policies and procedures.
Thank you. So today, we're going to go over several points, but basically we want to know, why are we having this discussion on Article 2? David alluded to that. We're going to find out what is Article 2, and I've asked again several people to assist. We're going to read through the current Article 2. A little bit of the history of Article 2. Not yet, not yet. We didn't rehearse. I also want to review actions of 2009, which is a parallel to what we have today. In 2009, we were in a similar review situation, and I want to go through the steps because it's a window into what's happening today with the Article 2 revisions that are going to be proposed. And at the end, we're going to go through a review of the draft language, the current draft language of Article 2. This is a primer. This is to learn about what Article 2 is, its history, where did it come from. So I ask, implore, urge you to raise your hand, ask a question, make a comment. It's small enough to have a group conversation. It's important that we feel connected to what is going on in here. All your conversations, or all your comments and conversations are welcomed completely. So first, agenda point. Why have an Article 2 discussion? Well, in June of this year, delegates, can I have a show of hands of who are delegates this year at General Assembly? How many delegates do we have? 12 total?
Up to 12.
We have 12 delegates from UUCA. Delegates are basically allocated by a formula roughly that goes 1 delegate for every 50 members of a congregation. So that's the general way that delegates are allocated to the congregations. But at this General Assembly, delegates will vote on whether or not to advance the language that is proposed to Article 2 to the agenda of next year. So this vote, I'm hoping, will require us to understand what we're voting for. In 2024, if it is advanced to the agenda in 2024, a 2/3 vote is required for adoption. So I'm presenting this with the hopes that we can be an educated voting population from our congregation and truly understand what is in Article 2, both previous and the new language. And as David also mentioned, this review of Article 2, which is unique among the 15 articles, there are also 15 rules and regulations, because it is the heart of Unitarian Universalism, the purpose of the association, our principles, our sources, inclusion statement, statement of belief. So that is to be reviewed every 15 years, and so we are in that 15-year cycle right now. And this effort has been led by the Article 2 Study Commission. Helen, if you could hold up one of those booklets there. No, just hold it up. This is free, and Helen, you may want to pass those out. I have 3 copies if people want to flip through. The Article 2...
Can I interrupt just a minute?
Sure thing.
Would you really say what's going to happen this June and what's going to happen the next June, because you have it pretty together?
All right. Godfrey is asking what's going to happen this June versus next June. Well, this June, there'll be a vote on the initial language that is proposed. That vote will be, do we want to advance this language in Article 2 to the next General Assembly? Excuse me. A majority vote is required to advance that language. If it is advanced, then the next June in 2024, a 2/3 vote will be required. Okay? So the Article 2 Study Commission has produced the report. They were commissioned in June of 2020 for a 2-year term to review these changes, and that's where they have done a revision of all sections of Article 2. So what we're going to cover today is the contents, a quick overview of Article 2 at the time of consolidation in 1961. Letta?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt.
No, this is
You asked us to interrupt.
interrupt.
So it just occurred to me, what?
Letta, I'm going to say, could you pass a microphone to Letta? Please, interruptions are requested.
Godfrey's very good question. Is it on? On? That's great. What happens if they don't get a majority? What happens if they don't get a majority vote this June? Then what happens?
The proposed language is retired. But I'll touch on that when I go through the 2009 event, because there is not necessarily a total retirement. I'll talk about another way that changes can be made to Article 2, but the question, Letta, is correct. If it does not get a majority vote, that process comes to an end. So I said I'm going to review our principles as of 1961 when we consolidated, which are not the principles we have today. I'm also going to look at changes from 1985, which is when our articles, when Article 2 that we see today mostly came into existence, principles, sources, etc. Then I'm going to, as I mentioned, look at 2009 to give us an understanding how does this work going forward. Review the formal charge to the Article 2 Study Commission. That commission was appointed by the UUA Board based on the UUA bylaws. And then we'll look at the draft language in Article 2. Okay. A little more introduction. So the Unitarian Universalist Association, I want to say it again, the Unitarian Universalist Association is a legal entity. And it is a voluntary association of autonomous, self-governing member congregations which have freely chosen to pursue common goals. This is found in Article 3. If you have your handout, you can see in the tiny, tiny print Article 3 as well. And the bylaws have 15 articles and 15 rules. And Article 2 contains 4 sections: the principles and sources, the purposes of the association, the legal entity, statement of inclusion, and a statement of freedom of belief. So I've asked several people if they'd come up, and I'd like to read through Article 2 as a collective audience. So I think, Susan, you're up first with the principles. Excuse me, this is as it exists today.
Hello, okay. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, acceptance of one another, and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part.
Lynn? Sure. We'll run the microphone over to you there.
Will the eighth principle be voted on at this GA and therefore included or not included?
That is not included in the proposed changes that we'll cover. So the eighth principle is not included in the,
I understand that that's not the question I'm asking. The question I'm asking is, will the eighth principle be voted on at this General Assembly?
I do not know the agenda,
Okay.
but as part of the Article 2 language
understand
vote,
that.
it won't be involved.
Thank
So
you.
they may or may not vote at the national level.
It's not on the agenda, this GA.
Oh, David is saying it, Carol Ann, it's not on the agenda. Okay. The sources?
The living tradition, is this on?
It is not.
The living tradition which we share draws from many sources. Direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. Words and deeds of prophetic people which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Wisdom from the world's religions which inspire us in our ethical and spiritual life. Jewish and Christian teachings which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. Humanist teachings which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. Spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. You want me to read the last part?
Please do.
Grateful for the religious pluralism which enriches and ennobles our faith, we are inspired to deepen our understanding and expand our vision. As free congregations, we enter into this covenant, promising to one another our mutual trust and support.
Thank you. Beth, before you start, as you can see up on the slide, there were two changes to our sources from 1985. One, you can see that the change from men to women in 2018 to be a more gender-neutral language, and the last source was added in 1995. Beth, if you go on with the purpose, and remember, this is the purpose of the association.
The Unitarian Universalist Association shall devote its resources to and exercise its corporate powers for religious, educational, and humanitarian purposes. The primary purpose of the association is to serve the needs of its member congregations, organize new congregations, extend and strengthen Unitarian Universalist institutions, and implement its principles.
Thank you. Doug, the inclusion statement?
Systems of power, privilege, and oppression have traditionally created barriers for persons and groups with particular identities, ages, abilities, and histories. We pledge to replace such barriers with ever-widening circles of solidarity and mutual respect. We strive to be an association of congregations that truly welcome all persons and commit to structuring congregational and associational life in ways that empower and enhance everyone's participation.
Thank you, Doug. So back to your question, what happens in 2009? This language is offered in 2009, but that package of changes, the entire Article 2, was an up or down vote. However, this language of the inclusion statement, which was included in that 2009 package, moved forward through a study group and then was added later on in 2013. I know it's a little more inside baseball than we all need to know, but this is the way it works. So the last section in Article 2 is our freedom of belief, and I'll read that. Nothing herein shall be deemed to infringe upon the individual freedom of belief, which is inherent in the Universalist and Unitarian heritages, or to conflict with any statement of purpose, covenant, or bond of union used by any congregation unless such is used as a creedal test. Oh. Nothing here within. Questions, observations? Look at that. Do you want to read it again? All right. Freedom of belief. Nothing herein shall be deemed to infringe upon the individual freedom of belief, which is inherent in the Unitarian and Universalist heritages, or to conflict with any statement of purpose, covenant, or bond of union used by any congregation unless such is used as a creedal test. Okay? So a little bit of the history. So the Unitarians and Universalists merged in 1961. I'm going to change that to actually they consolidated in 1961. And at the time of consolidation, Article 2 had only three sections. But I want to go back to why did we consolidate? What was that like? Because everything happens here in context. So the Unitarians and the Universalists had been separate denominations, actually starting back way in the early 1790s, but officially organized in the early 1800s and existed as independent liberal denominations throughout the United States. They had many things in common. One thing they had in common is many traditional denominations did not see them as Christian, because both the Unitarians and the Universalists had rejected the Trinity. In fact, the term Unitarian was applied to the Unitarians up in Massachusetts, not as a badge of honor, but as a pejorative by its opponents from the congregational churches, because if you didn't believe in the Trinity, Unitarian, then you couldn't be a Christian. So there's a common structure among the Unitarians and Universalists because of their common and shared beliefs in that way. But they did continue to operate as individual congregations until the 1900s, when slowly they began moving forward. So you shouldn't think of 1961 as someone waking up that morning and say, what do you think about consolidating? It was almost 100 years of conversation. I have to say, too, this consolidation has not happened also at the local level before it happened at the national level. We, here, the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Atlanta, was a joint Unitarian Universalist congregation starting in 1918. So the Atlanta Unitarians and Atlanta Universalists came together and formed what was known that time as the Liberal Christian Church, but was more commonly known in all newspapers' accounts and in their orders of service as the Unitarian Universalist Church of Atlanta, UUCA. Actually, the stained glass windows down the hallway come from the church where both the Unitarians and the Universalists joined in a joint church. That was the Unitarian Church, built on 1915 on West Peachtree Street between Ponce and 3rd, where the AT&T building sits today. So we were long in advance of being a joint congregation. There were several others as well. That joint Unitarian Universalist congregation unfortunately unwrapped itself, failed in the 1940s. I won't go into the details, but it really was over issues of segregation, the difference between Unitarians who primarily were coming to Atlanta from the outside, and the Universalists who mostly emerged from their Universalist churches that had been established in Georgia since the 1830s. The good news is the church was reconstituted in the 1950s as the United Liberal Church, and in 1960s, we moved into Cliff Valley Way, our building that we had vacated a few years ago, and we went from being the United Liberal Church to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Atlanta. So if we had preserved all our logos back from the 1918's UUCA, we could have saved a bunch of money, I am sure about that. But at the national level, both the Unitarians and Universalists had already formed a common hymnal. They had merged their publishing houses. Even the youth groups had merged prior to the church formally organizing in 1961. So when we finally came together, there had been a fair amount of conversation and talk about that. And so I'd like to go forward and just review what they decided as Unitarians and Universalists did in 1961 as principles. So this is 1961. In accordance with these corporate purposes, the members of the Unitarian Universalist Association, dedicated to the principle of a free faith, unite in seeking, 1, to strengthen one another in a free and disciplined search for truth as the foundation of our religious fellowship. 2, to cherish and spread the universal truths taught by the great prophets and teachers of humanity in every age and tradition, immemorially summarized in the Judeo-Christian heritage as love to God and love to man. 3, to affirm, defend, and promote the supreme worth of every human personality, the dignity of man, and the use of the democratic method in human relations. 4, to implement our vision of one world by striving for a world community founded on ideals of brotherhood, justice, and peace. 5, to serve the needs of member congregations and fellowships, to organize new churches and fellowships, and to extend and strengthen liberal religion. 6, to encourage cooperation with men of goodwill in every land. Any observations? What stands out? What immediately jumps out? Come on, up to the mic.
Okay, I'm Carol Ann Arvin, and it's very male-dominated. I mean, in almost every single one, it's reference to men. So
Yeah.
there you go.
It has some of the seeds of the principles that we have today.
That's true. Yeah, they do have the seeds. To Carol Ann's point, when I read this, this was written in 1961 by people who were raised and born in the 40s and 50s, and that was the language. You know, Helen would be at this time, if nothing changed, Mrs. Kiskell. Now I'm known as, oh, he's married to her. So I want to point out one other thing, too. The use of Judeo-Christian right in the principles. This, I will share with you, was a hot potato in 1961, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment as well. So is as love to God and love to man. That is a distinctive Universalist statement that comes back from their literature and what they actually preach within their congregations. So as I said, these principles were written by Unitarians and Universalists who were coming together, who had had joint conversations. I will share, too, not every Unitarian and Universalist church joined that association, so some remained lingering out of the association. There were no sources. For those who have good insight, this is the Article 2. There were no sources at that time. But there was sufficient consensus that they should go ahead and merge or consolidate based on that. However, the Universalists were not at all pleased with these principles. And you're going to say, I know, Jay, get a life, but I've spent hours reading the actual board meeting minutes of the General Assemblies from the 1960s going forward. It's a fascinating read in that there was such a battle going on, and this is the politest language you could find inside these meeting minutes, but it was a pretty strongly fought battle. The Universalists offered changes, complete revisions of the principles over the next 2 years. I won't read them in detail. But they wanted to change the opening preamble, which we read earlier, in accordance with these corporate purposes, to go back to uniting in the worship of God and the service of man in the promotion of the knowledge and interests of religion as taught by the master prophets of mankind, we affirm our faith. none of these changes took place. There was another controversy which has more significance that was also roiling as well, coming around in 1963. One was, do we really want to be called the Unitarian Universalist Association? When I read the actual meeting minutes, I found absolutely no controversy on that. It's almost as though someone said, what do you want to call it? And someone threw it out, fine. Yeah, Lynn, you're right, whatever. I was actually shocked. So I had to do some additional research and found out my reading was correct. But there was a movement later on, 2 years later, to change the name to the Liberal Church of America. But that was voted down. So I think UUA became, within a short amount of time, the identity of the new Unitarians Universalists coming together. But in 1963, another controversy came about that had to do with membership requirements. And I'm going to pause for just a moment. So to join the association, you had to meet certain criteria. And I think I have it on the next slide. Hold a service, stuff like that, make a contribution. But what was being suggested in 1963, that this new association with its autonomous members, that the new association would reach down and say, you need to change your bylaws to say your membership would include new language. And I skipped over one section. I'll come back to this in just a moment. I'll come back to the 63 controversy. Hold that thought, I got ahead. Third section. Third section in the 3 sections of Article 2. These don't have names to them, but the Unitarian Universalist Association hereby declares and affirms the independence and autonomy of local congregations. This is a better segue to my next statement. Local churches, fellowships, and associate members, and nothing in this Constitution or in the bylaws of the association shall be deemed to infringe upon congregational polity, that's my bolding, of churches and fellowships, nor upon the exercise of direct control by their members of associate member organizations, nor upon the individual freedom of belief which is inherent in the Universalist and Unitarian heritage. And lastly, no minister shall be required to subscribe to any particular interpretation of religion or to any particular religious belief or creed to obtain and hold fellowship in the Unitarian Universalist Association. Now, the controversy I alluded to in 1963 was the non-discrimination clause. And if those who have the history or lived through this, the 60s were a time of evolving civil rights movement, and now more explicit language is being required with regards to the inclusion of people of all races, colors, and creed. And so an addition that was being added to the criteria for your church to join the association is your individual church needed to have some language that said to maintain a policy admitting persons to membership without discrimination of race, color, or national origin. We would look at that today and say, yeah. But at the time, there was not the maturity within the civil rights movement. Our churches were scattered across the nation, including the South, and there wasn't unity on this thought. And there was another issue coming forward is as the association, can the association reach into your church, David, and tell them to change your bylaws? Remember, autonomous churches. That was the friction point between this. So in perfect Unitarian Universalist fashion, a committee was formed. And this went on for quite a while. Lots of languages going back and forth. And a 1963 resolution, I just give you the therefore. Therefore, be it resolved that all member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association be charged to declare and practice their faith in the dignity and worth of every person, and that all member congregations of our denomination are hereby strongly urged to welcome into their membership the full participation persons without regard to race, color, or national origin. I want to make sure you understand, strongly urged. This was still going on. Remember, this is right after independent denominations merged. Those independent churches have been independent in their own association. Now this question is, what is this relationship we're merging into really going to turn out to be? So among what happened to the resolution is a continued moving forward, and some people advanced, well, we'll change our principles. That the third principle would change, again, my bolding is indicating the changes recommended, to affirm, defend, and promote the supreme worth of every human personality, the language to be added, without regard to race, color, or national origin, the dignity of man, and the use of the democratic method in human relations. That change to the principles was not advanced. But again, another conversation opened under open membership policy that was then merged into the other thread that was going through this. And so it was the Committee on Congregational Polity and Membership Practices that offered a fourth section to the original 1961 Article 2. So it then expanded to the associate, and this is another section in Article 2. The association declares and affirms its special responsibility and that of its member congregations and organizations to promote the full participation of persons in all of its and their activities in the full range of human endeavor without regard to racialized identity, ethnicity, gender expression. I'm ahead. In accordance with the purpose of the inspectors, thereby declare and affirm its special responsibility and the responsibility of its members to promote the full participation of persons without regard to race, color, sex, or national origin in the association, and member churches and fellowships in the association. That was added in 1967 to Article 2, and the language I was reading from my slide here, and that language just kept on getting larger and larger and larger and larger and larger. And that language remained in Article 2 until 2013. And Letta, your question again, what happened? You'll see that this language in that section was changed in 2013. So I'm going to just go through some quick summary of changes that happened, then pause for any thoughts or conversation. So we know that we're formed in 1961. Unitarians, Universalists came together, principles. And then in 1967, after a number of conversations, we added the non-discrimination clause I read earlier. In 1974, there was an update to more general neutral language, where they began replacing the male-centric language, like man to humankind. 1985 was a watershed. We'll talk about that. That's when Article 2 was greatly revised, and that's what we see today. In 1995, another source was added, the sixth source, which is the spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions, which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. In 2009, another cycle, and I'll pause here for a moment. Previously, different from this year, which I'll go into, when the Article 2 language presented to the board, from the board to the General Assembly, was an up or down vote. And I listened to the hour or so of conversation, the pro and con mic back and forth in 2009, and there's a great deal of, but I want to amend this and I want to amend that, but that was just an up and down vote. You'll find out that's not the case today. So the 2009 language was voted down, did not move forward to be put on the agenda for the next General Assembly. In 2013, the inclusion language, which we see today, replaced the non-discrimination language I read earlier. And even though that language is put in the 2009 proposal, up or down vote the whole thing, I think it was a business resolution to advance that to a study group. I don't know all the details, but a study group was commissioned, and 2 years later they advanced additional changes to Article 2, which was adopted in 2013 in Louisville. So that was an alternate path to changing the contents of Article 2. And then in 2018, most recently, in Kansas City, again, we changed our language again to be even more gender neutral by replacing men and women with people. So this has been ongoing for some time. I'm going to pause there, ask for comments, observations, thoughts.
Hi, Jay. This is David Yamashita. I guess what I want to state is I didn't realize this Article 2 has changed or revised so much over the years. I was under the poor assumption that it pretty much stuck to its original language. So this was an interesting timeline that you provided, because it's certainly not obvious when you look at some of the documents that are on the UUA.org site. So thanks.
So 1985. Actually, it starts in the 1970s. And in the 1970s, there was a change in American society in many ways. The 1960s were, I wish I could remember most of them, but the 1960s was a period of great turmoil. There's just no doubt about that. And as the 70s emerged, we have a very strong movement within the women's movement to change not only language, but the roles, the way people are seen in our society. And that movement influenced the UU Women's Federation, Unitarian Universalist Federation. And that was formed, a women's federation, formed in 1963, shortly after the merger of the association. It came from the Association of Universalist Women and the Alliance of Unitarian and Other Liberal Christian Women. Pause. Not on this slide. So I'm at Emory University reading the handwritten meeting minutes of our churches, both the Unitarian and the Universalist, and come across the Union in 1918. What I find is the record book for the Women's Union. That is the union of the Universalists and the Unitarian women. Handwritten. And in the top of the page it says, Women's, and in very big letters, written over again and again, Women's Union. They were the most affectionate group of women I've ever met in my life. They met at people's homes, they enjoyed their company, they engaged in both education and social projects. And one woman whose name I can't recall, I won't say it for fear of putting the wrong information in history, who wrote the meeting minutes. She had a lively and very loving way of writing about this. And one day she writes in the meeting record minutes, well, our finances are in such wonderful shape, I think we should open an investigation to see what's going on. Now, as an historian, you could easily just find that one sliver of information and go, oh my goodness gracious. So in my transcription of the meeting minutes, I wrote, no, 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 no. Because if you didn't read up to all that, you would not find out just how affectionate, how warm these women were with one another. So it was the UU Women's Federation that actually advanced a lot of the changes we've talked about that we see today. It was not a study commission per se, but more of a grassroots action starting, some people say for 8 years, 5 years, many years before this was formulated, a conversation movement. They were just not going after Article 2, they were going after the larger sense of how language, Carol Ann, you said, how male-centric it was if you're raised in the 40s and 50s. So it was due to their efforts that our 1985 principles, we know them today, emerged. But I want to say something too, that when, let's make sure I don't skip a page again here, Jay. Yep. But in 1985, our principles and sources were now going to be written by UUs. I think that's an important factor. People often say, well, they changed the gender language. Absolutely correct. But I think a larger factor is that we are no longer specifically Unitarians or Universalists. We are now UUs, and we're now representing the denomination that we have come to know that was different than it was in 1961. So I'm going to go back to the 1961 principles and just review this briefly. Yeah, this is the 1985 revision to Article 2. So in 1961, we had to strengthen one another in a free, disciplined search for truth as the foundation of our religious fellowship. We can see that in our fourth principle. If you have your handout, you can see that. I'm not going to read through every one of these. But you can see in the second principle of 1961 how it has been moved to the sources. This is an important compromise that took place. Conversation ongoing with the Universalists was a fear of a loss of the Christian Judaic language, the loss of God language. And so having it moved out of the principles, the compromise was to create sources and bring that in there. The sources also allowed us to expand where we had come as the denomination. Number 3, you can see promote the supreme worth of every human personality. Use of the democratic process, you can see that in the first and fifth principle of today. Implement the vision of one world by striving for a world community. You can see that in the sixth principle. Serve the needs of the member congregations and fellowships to organize new churches, fellowships, extend and strengthen the liberal religion. That's in the purposes that we see today. And encourage the cooperation of men of goodwill. You can see that in the second principle. That's a little bit of a stretch, but they try to bring forward everything that was previous forward, and then needed to also add the relationship we had with our sources, not only to our Universalist side, but to all the other diverse set of sources that we now call our own in our denomination. So what we see too in 85, a new principle added, respect for the interdependency web of the existence of which we are all part. The sources were added for the reasons that I reflected earlier. It also showed that we've become highly more diverse in where we drew our sources from. The sixth source I mentioned was added in 1995. And this is an important thing. The purpose of the association was specifically defined to serve the needs of its member congregations. That language does not exist in 61 or elsewhere, so this is new. And the non-discrimination language that I talked about, which was race, creed, color, sexual orientation, that was retained in 1985. That had been emerging ever so much so since 1967.
Back to the previous slide. Dave Shoquist. The second to last bullet point, what was the motivation for that? And that suggests that they were doing things that congregations did not like, and this was restricting what they could do?
What's the that in your statement?
I'm sorry?
You said
Second to last bullet point.
purpose of the association?
Yes.
I never understood that, to tell you the truth. In terms of my research, I'd simply had assumed that was always there until I went back and I started researching why was that added, and never found a satisfactory answer where that came from. But you can think of this again, that if you read Article 3 in my tiny typed print handout, membership is of autonomous self-governing organizations. This group is now saying we are autonomous, self-governing, and we want the association to serve our needs. And I believe that's where the language came from. I only do that without detailed footnotes, but it would make sense that that would be extended accordingly. Questions? Observations? I'm going to go through 2 more slides, and then we'll take a break. 2009. In 2009, a 15-year cycle came up. And we were back at that 15-year cycle. And rather than forming a Article 2 study commission, as we did in June of 2020, a standing committee of the association called the Commission on Appraisal is a standing committee. They typically investigate items that would be of interest to help improve the association. They had just finished their work called Engaging Our Theological Differences, I believe. Finished that. So they were a fully formed group. They were well-oiled, well-mingled. They knew how to work with one another. They had all the opportunities to extend. Now was their research capabilities. So the board, I think very rightly so, asked that group to conduct the Article 2 review. And in that review, you'll see some of the changes that they proposed in 2009 that recur again in 2023 here. I didn't print out all the details of their proposed language, but they offer to rename Article 2 from Principles and Purposes to Covenant. They remove the primary purpose of the association to serve the needs of its member congregations. They remove the 6 sources, the enumerated list of sources, and replace that with a paragraph. Pause, off slide, Jay commenting. In one of the paragraphs, they refer to a statement about the Universalist heritage, about give them hope, not hell, which has been frequently associated with Reverend John Murray, the founder of American Universalism, to represent the Universalist heritage. Give them hope, not hell. John Murray never said that. At Murray Grove in New Jersey, actually where John Murray preached his first sermon, Universalist sermon in America in 1772, they had a plaque, give them hope, not hell. They took that down after that was discovered. So I was disappointed in the scholarship of the paragraphs. So they had a multiple paragraph replacement for the enumerated 6 sources. The principles renamed in number and order. They simply edited out words. Off script, hope this works when I get home. It's like they gave it to Helen, my favorite editor, and said, make this better by taking words out. So they took words out, but they all say the change. The inclusion language, we talk about systems of power, that was inserted. And the last one in the section on freedom of belief, freedom of individual belief was replaced with congregational freedom as a central to Unitarian Universalist heritage. By the way, this group did an excellent job. You know, they had all their work from their earlier classroom instructions, people, messaging, emails, comments, thousands. When they went to General Assembly in 2009, there was also a presidential election of which Peter Morales then became our UUA president. Do you remember who he ran against? I can't recall. Not important. But there was a presidential election taking place at the same time. So delegates had many things on their plate. I remember reading one blog of a delegate saying they're actually reading the language, the proposed language, while waiting in line to vote. The vote was 573 against, 573 for, 586 against. It was a tight tight vote. And as a result, the up or down vote on Article 2, the language that they proposed, failed. Looking around for a while, I wanted to know what the Commission on Appraisal team thought. And after a lot of angst and writing of this, they said there was only the bylaws section mandating the review every 15 years. And if you remember, in the 1985 changes, it was a grassroots bubbling up for years through the Women's Federation group that did that. So I think they had a hell of an act to follow in terms of the work they wanted to do. So I'm going to recommend a 10-minute break, but before I do that, does anyone want to make some comments or thoughts? After this, we're going to go forward and review the new language, the charge to the Article 2 study group and their proposed language.
I just have a super quick question. Andrea Bear, sorry. The bylaws mandate the review every 15 years. Can the review be, this is fine, and we're not going to change anything? Like, can that be I mean, if you put together a committee and they say, hey, is everything great? Like, are they allowed to just go, thumbs up, we still like Article 2?
Having read a lot about this, I've discovered the charge to review, there's an insatiable desire to edit.
But yes, they can say,
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah, fine. Fine for us. Next. By the way, I think this is the only bylaw that is required to review. Now, our bylaws that was spent 15 articles and 15 regulations, I have now, because I found some more, I now have 8 copies, 8 versions of the UUA bylaws on my computer. You are welcome to come over anytime, wine of your choice, and we'll read through them. They are a collection of thoughts, contradictions. So there is a process right now to review those bylaws in general, from top to bottom, not only Article 2. And I think that is coming up in 2024 or 2025. I don't know the date that that will be released. So it is now, yes, sir.
June Lester was saying that Peter Morales ran against Laurel Hallman.
Laurel? Okay. Okay. It's now 10:07. If you'd come back at, say, 10:25. I know, but we have time. By the way, if I said any other time, you'd come back at that time anyway.
By the way, we have coffee out in the main area. Please don't bring it into the sanctuary unless you have a covered cup. But if you want to go outside or stay in the area here, please feel free. Also, if you need something else other than milk, I know where to get it in the kitchen. So I didn't try to pour every liquid we have. So if you have something there that you want, let me know, and I'll be happy to get it.
Michael, can you turn the mics off? Why don't you take your seats and we'll get started again? Someone asked me, is there a quiz afterwards? Yes, it's online. It's only 168 questions, so I think you'll do fine. If you have on your seat or nearby, where are the copies of this? There's one. There should be a third one floating. Oh, could you? I'm going to see if we could. I'd like to get the group back here to have a copy of that. This is the final report from the Article 2 Study Commission, and I put the website at the top of that, but you can always go to UUA.org in the top right-hand search box, put in Article 2 Study Group, and you'll come across this report as well as some other materials, frequently asked questions, and other information. So these are my only 3 copies. This is my copy. Those copies, anyone who wishes to take that home is free to do. And again, others may see it online if they like. What I'd like to do now, probably in 45 minutes or an hour's time, go through what we have in front of us today. I think we have a sufficient background of our history, where we came from, how it happened. Now we're going to go through what's now in front of us in 2023. So I'm going to start with, first, the charge to the Article 2 Study Commission. This is in June of 2020. We therefore charge this commission to root its work in love as a principal guide in its work, attending particularly to the ways that we and our root traditions have understood and articulated love, and how we have acted out of love. The Commission is charged with reviewing all sections of Article 2 and is free to revise, replace, or restructure them as needed to meet the objectives stated above. We encourage the Commission to consider framing our principles that allow them to be brief and poetic. Our commitment to anti-racism, anti-oppression, and multiculturalism is love in action, and we should be centered in any revision of Article 2. Yes, Susan. Go to the microphone, please.
Susan McWethy here. Where did the language for that charge come from? Was that voted on at?
What I read was the language, the board, and it's contained in the document, that came from the UUA Board of Trustees that constituted the Article 2 Study Commission. So that was from our Board of Trustees. The new Article 2 has more sections, but basically the same ones, because purposes and sources were included in the original one. So now we have purposes of the associations, value and covenant, which is where the value statement is, where the principles would be, inspirations, which is previously called sources, inclusion, and freedom of belief statements. Actually, I'm going to pop through to, how many people have seen this graphic? Is this? Okay. This is included in the Article 2 final report, and you can see to their charge, they put love in the center, and then they put around that what they call are these values. So I just wanted to have that, there's a context when I go through the values, because that they won't be clear when I'm reading them just one by one. So I'm going to read this a bit and then ask for comment what you see is changed or the same. So this is section 1, purposes, purpose of the association. The Unitarian Universalist Association will devote its resources to and use its organizational powers for religious, education, and humanitarian purposes. I want to pause. That comes from the tax code. Yeah. You want to get your 30C, whatever, that's for tax purposes. So, and again, that was included, all of them. Actually, I think it's verbatim from the tax code. So here's the real essence of it. The primary purposes are to assist congregations in their vital ministries, support and train leaders, both lay and professional, to foster lifelong faith formation, to heal historic injustices, and to advance our Unitarian Universalist values in the world. The purpose of the Unitarian Universalist Association is to actively engage its members, and by members it means member congregations, or members. This has been a dispute on the language. The purpose of the Unitarian Universalist Association is to actively engage its members in the transformation of the world through liberating love. Now, you all have copies of the original, or the current, I should say, Article 2. Does anyone want to venture up any changes, observations? Come on, make it interactive.
This is David Yamashita. No mention of congregations, is there, or serving congregations?
This motion of members has been circulating around as, what does that mean? But you're right. I'm going to let Lita go, Susan, and then you.
Okay. Letta,
Letta,
no worries.
change your name again?
No, it's all good. Happens all the time. Well, it does say assist congregations. So I'm relatively new to Unitarian Universalism, and my experience with the UUA probably is reflected more by this, meaning I have experienced their support and training of leaders. The resources they offer on the website, which I have used, does do some of those things. So that's, in some ways, this is a little bit, in my opinion, more reflective of my experience of UU.
Mm-hmm.
Susan McQuethy here. The transformation of the world, I think, is a tall order. I'm not sure where that came from, because we'd never, tried to transform the world before that I know of. And then the term liberating love. Love is not mentioned in the original principles, in the whole, in our current documents. So I think those are huge changes just in that last sentence.
Helen Borland, I agree with Susan about the purpose of the Unitarian Universalist Association, as it is written now, is to support the member congregations, and now it's to actively engage its members. So that, to me, says now they want to provide direction in telling us what to do. Yeah, to transform the world.
Hey, Marquita Haberlin here. When I read this, it's like my mind says, okay, define liberating love. That is a term so vague, it could mean a million different things. And if you put it down, you need to define what you mean by that, because it could be as I said, it could be anything. Also, how can you actively engage members in their love? I mean, it seems an impossible thing to do, depending on your definition of love. So that needs to be spelled out, because it's big, and I think it's one of the main concepts here. And if we do not know what the definition is, it's a very slippery thing.
I will point out that I have an opportunity. I'm sorry, go ahead, Doug.
I agree. I don't know what those words mean, but I find them inspiring. To transform the world, what an incredible notion that is. And liberating love, I guess I have my own gut feeling about what that means. And again, I'm entranced by that language. Again, I don't know the definition, but it's persuasive to me.
So I've had the opportunity to hear our current and soon outgoing UUA President, Reverend Susan Frederick Gray. Part of this assists congregations in their vital ministries and support and train leaders, both lay and professional, was part of her stump speech, and that's not said in a derogatory way. This is what she said when she went to go speak people. So this has been a position from at least Susan and the National Association for quite some time. I don't want to make this as a pro or con, but this is an academic point of view. The language that had primary purpose to support its member congregations, that language has actually been under review since about 2000. And there are articles in UU World as well as other supporting articles, even in Leader Lab, which is an online resource provided by the UUA, that it asks the question, is the association made up of autonomous, self-governing congregations, or is it a single religious entity? And you can read into this language, why was that removed? Is that the background context? I'll let you do your own investigation on that, but there is language beneath this, if you do your research, that's been going around, since 2000, 20 years. No, I don't think so. You may have broke it when you dropped it.
Okay. My name is Dick Patterson. I've been a member here for about 13 years, but a UU for heaven knows how many. This document stresses love all the way through there, and that is not something that is going to ever be used to define Unitarianism. You go to any church in the city of Atlanta, and they're going to be talking about love constantly. So all of them have that value, and we might just as well not say it.
Carol Ann Arvin. I'm really concerned because this does not, we've talked about congregations and how congregations have shifted and how that word is being used or not used in this language. I'm very concerned that it says primary purposes are to assist congregations. It doesn't say member congregations, doesn't say UU congregations. And again, actively engage its members. Doesn't say individual versus congregational members. What comes to my mind is the Albion group.
The what group?
Albion, which is like a think tank that provides knowledge and experience and whatever for nonprofit organizations, religious organizations. And that is probably how they define themselves, that they provide support and training and all of these things to anybody who, sends in a donation and becomes a member. So I see this as stepping away somewhat from the congregation, from the UU congregational relationship between the UUA and the congregations. I see it more as becoming, the UUA becoming a resource that anybody can use. It's generalized training, it's generalized assistance, and that's concerning for me.
So I want to go back to member again, because on the last line there, again, if you peel back and look underneath, the question of what are members? Originally in 1825, the American Unitarian Association was an association of people not congregations. That didn't come for 40 some odd years later. And so there's been this ongoing conversation, again, inside the literature and chit-chat. What is a member of the association? Is it a purpose, a person? Is it a group? So there is no definition around member at this time, which is in contrast to the explicit nature of member congregations. Good or bad, that's just the observations being made at this time. So this is the purpose.
Can this be amended, GA?
Oh, I'll get to that in just a moment. The question is, can this be amended at GA? But right now I have a more... Michael? I'm not advancing. While we're waiting for the technical...
I have a question. So in the last sentence, are the members, those aren't individuals, the members of the congregations, right?
This is what I'm saying, Lynn. There's a conversation taking place of which people have asked, what is members? But if you peel back all the chatter on that, there's a conversation around congregations, people, organizations. So that is not settled.
It's not defined.
So I think the UUA bylaws rewrite, which Article 3 would be included in that rewrite, has an explicit definition of what membership is. I do not know if or how that third article is being drafted or considered.
Okay, so that.
But there's a lot of chatter going around. What does it mean? And personally, I don't think it's been well defined yet. Oh, good. Nope. So the next part, remember we had what was read earlier. We had principles and sources in one section. Excuse me. Now we have values and covenant. Values and covenant. As Unitarian Universalists, we covenant congregation to congregation and through our association to support and assist one another in our ministries. We draw from our heritages of freedom, reason, hope, and courage, building on the foundations of love. Love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. Inseparable from one another, these shared values are. I'm going to leave this, I'm just going to pop over to, those are the shared values: interdependency, equity, transformation, pluralism, generosity, and justice. I'm going to leave that for just a moment for any thought or comment, and then I'm going to go through, but I won't read them all because unfortunately the objective of becoming brief turned into the opposite. I think we went from 100 to 300 words. Susan? Nope, not on.
Hello? Oh, yeah, thank you. Again, just repeating what was on the last one, love. You know, love is undefined. The spiritual discipline of love, I don't know what that means. And it's a power that holds us together. It's at the center of our shared values. I think it's just putting too much, it's just overworking love, and it's become meaningless here.
I am going to go through and display, but not necessarily read through every one of the values. I'll read the top line, but not the explanation. So, interdependence, we honor the interdependent web of all existence. Pluralism, we celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. I'll go through all these, then I'll come back and we can chat and comment. Justice. We work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where we all thrive. Transformation. We adapt to the changing world. Generosity. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. And equity. We declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. I think that's the end of them. Yeah. So I'm going to go and put on the chart for a guideline any comment that people would like to make, either on a particular or the structure itself.
Helen Borland, I'm looking at this, and this could be a model for a business. I don't see anything in there that has to do with spirituality, and that concerns me. There's nothing in here about, even though love is a center, there's nothing about spirituality, and that's what I think church is about.
Go on, Susan. What do you want?
Transformation. The transformation is not defined. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. We adapt to a changing world. The world is changing in some really bad ways. And, there are things, I just think it needs to be more fleshed out, because what does it mean? We're going to adapt while the world is becoming more authoritarian? I don't know what that means.
So these values have changed. I don't know if anyone's followed probably been on the table for about a year. So there were values that were independence / something. So there's a great deal of slashing. So these words finally did come down. There were a number of, I'll call them workshops, where things were presented, and I think that's where feedback was beginning to emerge. Also a few opportunities within those workshops for people to talk among themselves. But these values emerged, I would say, halfway through it was a 2-year program, but they're now in the 3rd year. I'll just zip my lips on that. So they came out not early on, but later on. So I don't know whether they've had the full ability to be examined and researched, these values. But nonetheless, this is in the proposed language. I want to go to the next section, which is called inspirations. We know them as sources. And so inspirations read, and remember, this is replacing the enumerated list of sources that we have today. As Unitarian Universalists, we use and are inspired by sacred and secular understandings that help us to live into our values. We respect the histories, contexts, and cultures in which they were created and are currently practiced. These sources ground us and sustain us in ordinary, difficult, and joyous times. Grateful for the religious ancestry we inherit and the diversity which enriches our faith, we are called to ever deepen and expand our wisdom. By the way, when I do this, that means stand up and say something. I remember during the last presidential election, after George Jeb Bush gave a speech in Florida, says, "This is where you clap now."
Okay, so when I read this, I'm stopped at inspired by sacred understandings. And I'm sorry, but I have to go, define sacred? What in the world? Who is defining what is a sacred understanding? I know we have all these wonderful sources, but this is a meaningless, to me, a meaningless putting together of words. What's a sacred understanding? A secular understand, but somebody has to be the judge of what is sacred and non-sacred. And as a Unitarian, a humanist Unitarian, I have a problem with this language.
So, go ahead. Well, you're sharing your thought. Let me make one comment. No, please. So, what I've not been able to understand is the context for the change that actually goes back to 2007 through 2009, when the Commission on Appraisal did the language brought to us in 2009. I'd never discovered the motivating force behind eliminating the enumerated list for the paragraphs. There was constant attention, well, can't you add this and add that and add this? So it may have been, well, we'll just get rid of the list, but I have not, as a historian or just a curious person, figured out why paragraphs change the enumerated list.
Loud. Letta, in some, yeah, I guess I do like the enumerated list. I see myself, the very first source is direct experience of the old one. And I like that because I'm like, oh, I have direct experiences of a lot of things. But then I also think, now that I read this version, and I apologize that this is my first time reading the inspirations.
No apologies required.
Okay, but in the previous one, it just sort of throws in wisdom from the world's religions. It's sort of like a catch-all, and it sort of puts it in, it's like when you make a list longer and longer, then things that are listed feel this way, and things that aren't listed feel that way. And this, in some ways, I feel like tries to capture all of that. This probably more, in some ways, I feel like this more accurately probably demonstrates what our service looks like, right, than this enumerated list. It's not like, okay, we need to have one service, check, whereas we really do more of that. So I can see maybe where this is coming from.
It did solve one problem it did find with having the list, not only what was on the list, but what's the order of the list. And so a committee was formed. All right, so that is known as inspirations. Dick, please go ahead.
This seems to be replacing the principles.
This is replacing the sources. The section before was the principal substitute.
Okay. Are we now off of that subject?
Well, I'll come back to it since you're there. These values now stand for where our principles once stood in Article 2.
Okay, so I don't think it's a good substitution, because you see any one of these, say pluralism, it doesn't immediately tell you what it means. You have to stop and think what pluralism means, and it's different things to different people. Whereas the principles said exactly what it meant, and you knew what it meant, and you can put it in a five-word sentence and present it to the RE kids.
Doug, please.
I guess one thing I'm getting from this that I didn't appreciate before I came today is the evolutionary notion of the Article 2 and all the revisioning and all the rethinking and all of the study that's gone into this over many, many, many years. I mean, this just didn't happen last week kind of thing. And so I guess what I'm thinking is this just not the latest iteration of our becoming who we are and what we want to be in the world? And you're right, these things don't have hard and fast definitions, but our principles have gone through revisions and had to be changed and had to be modified. And we looked at how the gender language got changed and altered over time, if you will. So I think it's natural for us to be confronted with new language, new ideas, unspecified definitions of things that cause us to struggle. But I think our current principles are really values. Now, this set of values that are here are different in word and in texture and in reflection. They're not sentences. These are concepts. And I think that's where I'm having the dilemma. Can I stretch my thinking to go from 7 principles or 8 principles into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 values? It's a conundrum. I know, but they're not one sentence statements. I know, yeah.
Let Godfrey go and then Susan.
So what's missing for me in this is the value of reason and truth that seems to me to be very important to my being happy in a Unitarian church. So I don't see that there. Maybe it's there, but I don't see it.
Susan, again. I can find flaws in the principles and the sources. I mean, they should be looked at. This is just too extreme. We're being asked to throw out what feels foundational to a lot of people. And I think it's going to cause division. I'm really concerned about this. This is more than a revision. This is a rewrite, and we're throwing out a lot of our history. Maybe if this were like added on as an addendum, or that these values further define who we are or something, but throwing out the principles and sources doesn't work for me. I just think it's way too extreme.
David?
This is David Yamashita. Jay, I did want to ask you, is this the final version of the text before it goes into GA?
Okay, I'll address that now. That's the excellent question. It is my last slide. I'll talk about it now. I want everyone to know David saw my slide deck before this, so he's... The question is this the final language? Remember I said in 2009, the Commission on Appraisal did their work and then presented the language to the General Assembly delegates, who, in their pro and con conversation, spoke a great deal about, can I amend this? Can I change that? I don't know whether that was the direct line to it, but in this year, amendments are allowed to the language. So what you're seeing here is language that has been offered, and in April of this year, a website was opened, and you want to be really nerdy, go to discuss, D-I-S-C-U-S-S, discuss.uua.org. And they opened that up for amendments to this language. And I think 480, 502, the number has been confused, a lot of amendments or proposed amendments were provided. Afterwards, in May, the UUA Board, in conjunction with the Article 2 study team, had several workshops, which I attended one of 3. And it was an effort now to take, well, these 6 amendments look about the same, so can you boil them down into, quote, an official amendment? So that work's ongoing. And then, if I understand the process correctly, at the General Assembly mini-assemblies, has anyone attended a General Assembly mini? At the General Assembly mini-assemblies, which will be held on Thursday and Friday, a number of amendments that have been taken from the larger suggestion list, converted into an official amendment, would then be put forward at the mini-assemblies to be voted upon. Meg Riley, in my workshop, spoke with real honesty. There are so many, we're unsure whether the many, many changes will ever get represented into an amendment, and we may not even get to all the amendments. So whatever happens on Thursday and Friday, I think the final vote is Saturday. I think that's the schedule. That language will not be known until just before the vote. I'll make my comment on my last slide. I'm trying to be academic, not my opinion. I hold that back. All right, so I'm going through the values again to flip through to the slides to get to the inclusion inspirations we've talked about. Any more comment on inspirations or sources as we know them? So the inclusion statement, again, this started way back in 1960s with the change to language to bring it into what eventually became a list of race, creed, color, ethnicity, etc., to this statement that was put in the original 2009, voted down, re-included through a study group, and included in 2013. That language I spoke to you about with the list of gender, sex, nationality was moved to a rule down in the bylaws. So I'll just read this because this is the only language that was not changed by the study commission. Systems of power and privilege and oppression have traditionally created barriers for persons and groups with particular identities, ages, abilities, and histories. We pledge to replace such barriers with ever-widening circles of solidarity and mutual respect. We strive to be an association of congregations that truly welcomes all persons who share our values. We commit to being an association of congregations that empowers and embraces everyone's participation, especially those with historically marginalized identities.
That's perfect. That's not exactly the same. That's not exactly
This is unchanged language. That is in Article 2 today. Well, this is the language I got from the report, so.
So maybe they did change something. It is like the last, especially historically marginalized identities.
The part that I wanted to point out, if you remember, this was put forward first in 2009. Can anyone adjust what I left out? Okay. Well, forgive me, I took this out of the document and I didn't prove it back to the original one. But remember, this language was introduced in 2009. And I want to make sure we understand. We commit to being an association of congregations. And if you go back to purposes, members, and so I don't think this language in the, again, academic speaking, synchronizes to what we had seen earlier. And I believe this is a carryover, cut and paste, error-prone J, putting it in here. But that language does differ conceptually what we saw earlier. But that's the inclusion language. The last article, and if you pull up the current, I'll actually read the current article. You can compare it to. So freedom of belief in today's Article 2. Nothing here within shall be deemed to infringe upon the individual freedom of belief, which is inherent in the Universalist and Unitarian heritages, or to conflict with any statement of purpose, covenant, or bond of union used by any congregation unless such is used as a creedal test. And today's language reads, congregational freedom and the individual's right of conscience are central to Unitarian Universalist heritage. Congregations may establish statements of purpose, covenant, and bonds of union so long as they do not require that members adhere to a particular creed. I will point out, and this is where because I'm close to the end of the deck, so I'm taking microphone liberties right now. If you notice the phrase, individual freedom of belief has been removed. That was done also in 2009. Remember I mentioned the Commission on Institutional Change and their work engaging our theological values? It's an interesting report, but it's filled with a number of contradictions. Actually, that's where the Article 2 Study Commission say that they derive their inspiration of love from that report. That report, if you keep on reading down, is the first time, published in 2005 or 7, where there's a questioning, should Unitarian Universalism continue its practice of adhering to Enlightenment values, freedom, reason, and belief, freedom, reason, and tolerance. There's that first questioning officially in a document. However, if you keep on reading and reading and reading, it does state in the end that freedom of individual belief is the most commonly stated statement you get from individuals, Unitarians, and Universalist belief. This, again, I'm going to try to be academic. This change of freedom of individual belief is tied to a larger conversation about individualism, which has been ongoing since the 90s. So there's a context to this structure here, and it really comes down to individualism, what that means, good or bad. And so you can see that it reflects a side of that conversation. Congregational freedom, however, is really congregate polity, which is included, I think, in Article 3. Yeah, it's Article 3, Section 3.2, congregational polity is explicitly spelled out. So now congregational polity or congregational freedoms brought in. So I'm not sure of the mixture in terms of the context. How did this come out? But it clearly is reflecting something. If you read the literature, if you do it 100 years from now, you would say, oh, this would make sense if you read all this. So that is Article 2 as it exists today. And I just have one more slide. Oh, I will hold that off. David?
Yeah, this is David. I just find this incredible. I'm just going to say it from like a procedural process standpoint. When a document has 400 amendments being discussed, I mean, I sort of led my question a little bit because I know there's going to be another version of this that's going to be released on June 14th. Okay, so whatever text you're reading today, it's open to another set of changes coming June 14th before GA. So for those of you who are delegates, you're not even seeing the text that supposedly will be voted on at GA in Pittsburgh, or if you're attending virtually or whatever. There's just another version of it coming out, you know, in 2 weeks. And then we're supposed to vote on, yeah, we should do something. I'm not even sure what I'm voting on as a delegate to GA. I'm not even certain what I'm really voting on, to be honest with all of you. So, you know, I find this to be good discussion, and I feel like for such an important document that documents what characteristics of a Unitarian Universalist is, it just seems awfully fast to me, because we're not even reviewing final versions of text, or it doesn't include 400 amendments, or obviously this has a lot of input still ongoing. So that's just me speaking. So, you know, I'm going to be making all those considerations when I go to GA. But frankly, if the text is, you know, radically different, or if it changes a lot, I'm not going to know what you know, my version of voting is going to be, I'm not sure what I'm voting on. So, you know, it's going to be a very strange thing for me personally, because, you know, me with 30 years of contract review and all this stuff, you can sort of see my position, right? I don't read documents and sign multi-million-dollar contracts with amendments coming in at the last minute, right? And I sort of feel like this is what we saying what we are as UUs. And if it's just going to be constantly changing, my goodness, how's it going to change a year from now, you know, in the 2024 GA? And that's my only statement to all this is, seems like it's still going through a lot of change, you know?
Godfrey?
I mean, it seems to me the spirit of these votes is to have something that you look at really well, and you vote on it 1 year, and then you come back and the standards go up, and you before it becomes the rule. It seems to me the clock hasn't started yet. So is there, I mean, at least what I've heard this morning is that we just voted it down at this meeting, and whatever is motivating this gets motivated again, and then you get into a situation where you've had a pretty honest look at what's going to be voted on over, say, a year period of time, and then you come back, and then it sort of fits the spirit of what I think is trying to be done there, but for whatever reason, I mean, it just seems not to be living up to that spirit for some, and no malevolent reason for that. It's just, you know, people want to talk about it. Well, nothing wrong with talking about it and moving it and making it better 2 years from now, but we don't want to make a bigger mess than we already have this year. So I heard David saying, and David, go to it.
I do want to make one comment, David, you and I, not on voting, but on attendance and the ability to vote. There was a question, can you vote as a delegate and not go to GA? And the answer is absolutely. So there is a business delegate capability that requests only a donation. So I applaud one of the changes that the UUA has done is lower the cost of attendance. For anyone who has physically attended, it's onerous in both time and cost. So the delegates at UUCA can be selected without a travel or cost. But I really think our president of our congregation should attend.
And I am attending in person.
Did I say that too directly? This is really the end. And so we've talked about this, what's going on, and I chatted on it a bit. There are changes taking place as we speak. There have been opportunities to engage in UUA, or I'll say Article 2 sponsored workshops. However, when I looked at the statistics provided by the Article 2 team about how many people participated, and if you do the math and get out your calculator and do your percentages correctly, about 5% of UUs have been actively engaged in this process, which, if you do the math again, leaves a large portion of UUs yet uninformed or unengaged in this process. So I'll leave that I think among the things we need to do, why I volunteered to do this, is to at least get some more folks engaged in this. I'll conclude, not everyone is in a favor of this. There's a website that is, if I can share the opposition thinking, there's a website called Save the Seven Principles, is that right? SaveThe7Principles.org. On that website, there are people who've made their own academic observations, more opinions than the academic like I am, about the changes that are proposed and the process ongoing. So I welcome any debate, all points of views, because no matter how onerous it may be, debate always hones an idea to a much better state. So I'm going to turn over to Ann. Oh.
So Susan here, there is going to be amended language, and there's not going to be enough time to consider it, to find out how our congregations feel about it. I'd like to think I'm representing my congregation. I'm a delegate. But we can't do it this way. I mean, it's just not even possible to take something this serious, this expansive, and do it in a hurry. And I guess I also just don't know, will there be amendments after, if it gets voted in this month, will the language change again? Do we know?
My understanding is once it is advanced, if indeed advanced
it can't.
This year, amendments are no longer allowed, and it becomes, like it was previously, a fixed document which is not amendable.
Okay.
We have closing words. I'm going to do this without tripping. Over here.
Hello. No, I'm just, there we go. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for coming. We appreciate your time. We still have some time also in the building if you want to continue some conversation after this, just amongst yourselves and amongst each other. So with that, closing words. We take refuge in all that is holy. We take refuge in sacred teachings throughout the ages. We take refuge in our community of faith and in the interdependent web of life.
Thank you all for coming.